Hello and welcome. My name's Chris Cann with Mining Journal, and with me I have Hayden Locke, President and Chief Executive of Chile-focused copper development group Marimaca. Hi Hayden.
Hi Chris.
We've got Hayden for a number of interviews looking at various elements of Marimaca, but today we're going to focus on the upside and the exploration, which is an exciting story. Hayden, I wanted to start by understanding the difference between the IOCG style deposit, which Marimaca is based on or is, and then the porphyry deposits, which are typical and the mainstay of production of copper out of Chile.
So geologically, they're actually quite similar. I mean, they're both related to magmatic hydrothermal fluids associated with intrusive rocks, so big heat sources that sit below the earth, and then a flooding of hydrothermal fluids which are, due to their heat, saturated in all of the the commodities, the metals that we would like to hopefully have in economic concentrations. So in that sense, they're quite similar. I think the key difference is around, well, some very specific geology. But majorly, porphyries tend to have a higher proportion of iron sulphide. So, and then IOCG stands for iron oxide, copper gold. So a different derivative of iron. So really, in Marimaca's case, we have a pretty high prevalence of magnetite alteration throughout the deposit, which is similar to many other IOCG deposits, and that is really why we've defined Marimaca as an IOCG deposit. Actually, Marimaca is, we think, a hybrid. It's an unusual deposit. It's a hybrid between a manto and an IOCG.
Okay. The porphyries, obviously, they're developed in subduction zones. It's a very typical and kind of linear, depending on structural deformation in the area, kind of formation or genesis. IOCGs, from my understanding, they pop up a little more unexpectedly. Olympic Dam, obviously, the famous example was found by accident. You've got a regional plan for scaling similar kind of deposits. How confident are you that you're going to get this repetition of mineralisation on a regional scale?
Well, we've already seen the repetition of the mineralisation. The question is, are we going to get a repetition of the same scale of Marimaca? That's the big unanswered question, and we can't know that until we start getting into the drilling. I think the difference between porphyry and IOCG is an IOCG deposit is a relatively newer concept, and so the amount of study that has been done and the amount of understanding of it as a geological concept and a geological marker is somewhat different. But you're absolutely right. IOCG tend to be the theory of an IOCG, and particularly in an Olympic Dam sense, is of an extensional zone where there's a extensional dilationary jog, a fracturing of the rock, and then a conduit for that flowing of hydrothermal fluids. So what we know in terms of Marimaca is that we have the large-scale regional structures, which are very important. We have the large-scale subsurface heat source in the form of intrusives, and we're talking very large scale, tens of kilometres, which is very important. And then what we're looking for now is the localised level sort of fracturing and geological setting that is similar to Marimaca, which is the reason for Marimaca existing. And in 2021, we drilled 3 conceptual targets for Marimaca-style mineralisation and made 3 discoveries. So we have no doubt that there's more Marimaca-style mineralisation. What we want to know is Marimaca the small brother or sister of a bigger brother or sister in the region? Are there going to be lots of smaller Marimacas in and around? What we know of IOCGs is they often occur in clusters.
Okay, and in terms of whether Marimaca is or isn't big or small, at the moment, what's the resource? And that's just oxide, as I understand it. What's your expectation or your exploration target, if you're allowed to give me those numbers? And then what's it look like underneath in the sulphide, which you've already dipped a toe in the waters of?
So that's all oxide. It's depending on cut-off grade, we're somewhere around the 220 to 240 million tonne mark at about 0.5% copper. So a bit over 1 million tonnes of contained copper across measured, indicated and inferred in the 43101. So it's a decent scale oxide project for an IOCG, but typically when you look at IOCGs and porphyries, the scale is driven, the very large scale is driven by the sulphide potential at depth. We haven't done any exploration work, so I can't go out and throw out targets in terms of what we think of Marimaca. We haven't put out any exploration targets yet. But what I will say is the sulphides tend to dwarf the oxide, proportionally in these IOCG deposits. One key example of that is the mantos-style project, which our partner Ausenco built in Peru. Started with an oxide project and is now a very large sulphide project sitting below that. Candelaria, owned by Lundin, similar story. And then, of course, Olympic Dam, the supergiant, is a very good example of that.
What does that mean in terms of, at the risk of jumping into the operations again, processing, infrastructure, etc., to be able to process all the different types of oxide, different types of ore that you're looking at?
Well, oxide and sulphide, primary sulphide, so chalcopyrite or those sorts of derivatives require a different processing methodology. The real question is, the oxide almost always sits above the sulphide deposit. It's very, very rare to see an oxide below a sulphide. But the question is always, does the oxide wipe its own face and can it be developed by itself and make sense as a project? Often you see an oxide be developed concurrently with a sulphide if it's not economically viable. What we have at Marimaca is completely one of the best copper projects that you're likely to see from a return on invested capital perspective. So regardless of if we make a big sulphide discovery, we have the ability to build the oxide cathode, and that will only benefit any future development we have in the sulphide zone. So I think it doesn't change our view on how this project will be developed, which is why we're probably not as focused on drilling out the sulphides aggressively today.
Okay, and regionally, there are half a dozen different prospects that you're looking on, or project areas that have got different amounts of drilling. Can you give us a bit of a snapshot of the maturity of those different deposits and where you're excited?
So we have three projects, the shallow oxide projects within 3 or 4 kilometres of Marimaca, and we view those as satellites of Marimaca. And one in particular we're very excited about, which is the Mercedes project, which is 1 kilometre to the north of Marimaca. Arguably it's an extension of Marimaca. It looks very similar, but we haven't yet confirmed that. So there'll be more work done on that. You're right, regionally we have about 25 kilometres of strike, which is prospective for Marimaca style mineralisation. Numerous targets, we just haven't had the money to go and drill that, but we think that that's going to change in the near future. And then we have another project, which is the Sierra de Medina project, which we've recently put out some news on, which we realised we had acquired a lot of data when we acquired the ground. And we recently had our team, led by Sergio and Paola, go and review all of the data that we have available. And that's painted a pretty compelling exploration picture for those assets. That is completely different to Marimaca style mineralisation, and that's in the Mantos Blancos Cachorro copper belt, which is a much larger scale prize in terms of the potential for many millions of tonnes of contained copper. So Mantos Blancos, it's been mined for 50 plus years. I think it's 300 or 400 million tonnes at 1%. Cachorro is currently 300 million tonnes at 1.1%. So these are very, very big manto-style deposits which have many decades of mine life. So that's the prize that we're looking for in that belt, and we're very excited about the potential there.
Okay, as a management team, you're being pulled in different directions here. Obviously, you need to focus on delivering the DFS at Marimaca, but you have these exciting opportunities for exploration. When you've got a limited exploration budget, as you have at the moment, where are you prioritising it? What do you think will give you the best return?
Well, obviously reprocessing historical data is very cheap, and especially now that largely the drilling and exploration is done on the main project, and so the geological work is much more project related. We have the resources available to send Sergio and his team out, and really this is Sergio's passion, and what he's been very successful through his career is in delivering value through exploration. So we're excited that he's been able to go out and get back to what he loves most. So that's the first thing. We'll do some work in terms of road cuttings and relatively cheap surface geology at Mercedes in particular. There's some geophysics work we can do. But one of the big questions that we're trying to answer as a company is, we believe, no junior mining management team believes that they're overvalued, but we certainly believe that right now Marimaca is not being given the correct valuation relative to the amount of de-risking work we've done and the fact that we've got Mitsubishi as our partner. And so if we follow that logic, then we're getting less than zero value for our exploration ground. And so the question we're wrestling with now is how do we finance the ongoing exploration? What we know is there is money available to back Sergio and his team because he's been exceptionally successful. The biggest question is how do we best surface that value for our current shareholders? And so that's what we're working through at the moment. But I expect during the course of this year, we will see movement on our ability to go out and start to drill and assess some of these very exciting targets.
Hayden, we are going to go into other aspects of Marimaca as a company and as a project in other interviews, but on the exploration, we'll leave it there. Thanks for your time.
Thanks.